Cold air stung my cheeks that morning. Flagstaff mornings hit different, even in May. I stood by Mark's old Ford. Dust covered the hood, red from the canyon winds. The tires were low. The truck looked abandoned, like I felt most days. I told myself again, it's just a truck. Heck, selling it would cover one bill, maybe two. But my chest tightened anyway. The scent of cedar and smoke hit as I pulled the handle. Mark always smelled like that after shifts. Wildland fires left traces, even years later. I climbed in. The seatbelt creaked, stiff. It still held his cologne. God, it almost felt like he'd slide into the driver's seat. But he wouldn't. Mark's been gone 3 months. A heart attack stole him fast. The glovebox latch stuck. My thumb pressed harder. A loud click echoed in the empty driveway. Inside, just old papers at first. Registration, gas receipts, a faded Route 66 map. I stacked them neatly. Then I saw it. A small leather notebook, a key wrapped in masking tape. 4B, scribbled in black marker. My breath hitched. Mark's handwriting was always clean, neat. This was rushed, messy. I opened the notebook with shaking hands. First line stopped me cold. If something happens to me, find 4B. Protect her. Don't trust my brother. Her. My throat went dry. What her? Rick's been circling for weeks, telling me to sell the house, the truck, everything. Close this chapter, Hannah? He said yesterday. Now this? The wind outside howled through the cracked window. The key felt heavy in my palm. Unit 4B. Whatever's behind that door could change everything. Would you open it? Or walk away? Comment 1 or 2. I carried the notebook and key inside. Cedar scent clung to my hands, sharp and cold. Sleep never came that night. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. By dawn, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Mark's photo. The pine wind slipped through the window, cutting straight to my chest. Pine wind slid through the cracked kitchen window. It carried the scent of resin and last night's rain. I stared at the old photo on the fridge. Mark stood there, soot on his cheeks, smiling. His arm around me, back when he fought wildland fires near Coconino. His boots were always by the door. Scuffed, ash-stained, smelling like campfire and sweat. That smell still lingers in the closet. Some mornings, I sit by it. Pretend he's about to walk in, telling me, "Coffee's cold again, Han." But the house is quiet now. Only the hum of the old fridge keeps me company. Every creak of the floor reminds me, he's gone. No one to fill the chair by the window. Rick stopped by again this morning. Didn't even knock. His boots thudded against the porch like a warning. Truck's still here. He muttered, eyes scanning the driveway. We should sell the house too. Fast. Prices'll drop come summer. His hand tapped the kitchen counter like it was his. Like he already owned the place. I said nothing at first. Watched him adjust his gold watch, the one Mark gave him years back. It looked heavy on his wrist, like guilt. Mark wanted things simple. Rick continued. Close this chapter, Han, move on. No reason to drag this out. But Mark never said that. Mark hated rushing decisions, especially about the home we built together. My fingers brushed the photo again, the corner worn smooth. I remembered how Mark used to polish his truck every Sunday. How he'd bring home wildflowers from the canyon for the table. Now that same truck sat in the driveway, holding a secret in its glove box. And Rick wanted me blind to it. The fridge hummed louder, or maybe it was my pulse. I tightened my grip on the counter's edge. Something inside me shifted, quiet but certain. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was a warning. Pine wind slid through the cracked kitchen window. It carried the scent of resin and last night's rain. I stared at the old photo on the fridge. Mark stood there, soot on his cheeks, smiling. His arm around me, back when he fought wildland fires near Coconino. His boots were always by the door. Scuffed, ash-stained, smelling like campfire and sweat. That smell still lingers in the closet. Some mornings I sit by it. Pretend he's about to walk in, telling me, "Coffee's cold again." Han. But the house is quiet now. Only the hum of the old fridge keeps me company. Every creak of the floor reminds me, he's gone. No one to fill the chair by the window. Rick stopped by again this morning. Didn't even knock. His boots thudded against the porch like a warning. "Truck's still here," he muttered, eyes scanning the driveway. "We should sell the house too. Fast. Prices'll drop come summer." His hand tapped the kitchen counter like it was his. Like he already owned the place. I said nothing at first, watched him adjust his gold watch, the one Mark gave him years back. It looked heavy on his wrist, like guilt. "Mark wanted things simple," Rick continued. "Close this chapter, Han. Move on. No reason to drag this out." But Mark never said that. Mark hated rushing decisions, especially about the home we built together. My fingers brushed the photo again, the corner worn smooth. I remembered how Mark used to polish his truck every Sunday. How he'd bring home wildflowers from the canyon for the table. Now that same truck sat in the driveway, holding a secret in its glove box. And Rick wanted me blind to it. The fridge hummed louder, or maybe it was my pulse. I tightened my grip on the counter's edge. Something inside me shifted, quiet but certain. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was a warning. The photo slipped from my fingers. It landed face down on the counter. The back smelled faintly of dust and old ink. I thought about the last months before Mark died. He was quieter. Spent long hours in the garage, door shut, music low. He always said, "Just sorting my tools, Han." But his voice carried a weight I didn't question then. Now, with that notebook in my drawer, every moment felt different. The late-night phone calls, he ended quickly. The times he came home smelling of cedar and something heavier, like varnish or smoke. Signs I ignored, too wrapped in routine and trust. A floorboard popped under my heel as I walked to the window. Outside, Rick's tire tracks scarred the dirt driveway. Still fresh, curling with loose pine needles. He was circling more often, like a hawk, waiting for something to drop. The house felt colder, though the heater hummed softly. I tightened my sweater, fingers brushing Mark's old wedding band still on a chain around my neck. The metal was cool, heavy. It felt more like a reminder than comfort tonight. I opened the drawer again. The notebook's leather cover was worn, edges frayed. Mark's rushed handwriting sprawled across the first page, echoing in my mind. "Protect her. Don't trust my brother." Who was her? And why did Mark believe Rick would be a threat? My stomach knotted as I imagined Sophie's age, if she even existed. Could Mark have left a daughter behind all these years? The wind rattled the windowpane. A loose pinecone tapped against the siding, hollow and rhythmic. I stared at the key beside the notebook. The tag's ink was smudged, but still clear. 4B. I wasn't sure what I'd find. A storage unit filled with memories. Or proof Mark lived a life I never knew. My pulse steadied, strangely calm. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Resolve. I wasn't letting Rick strip away Mark's legacy without answers. Not when there were pieces left to gather. The fridge hummed low, blending with the wind outside. I closed the drawer gently, the key still resting on top. Tomorrow, I'd drive to Route 66. Unit 4B waited, and I was done avoiding it. The house felt different that morning. Quieter, like the walls were listening. I brewed coffee, but didn't drink it. The smell clung to the air, bitter and stale. Outside, frost glazed the porch railing, catching the pale light. Rick hadn't shown up yet, but his shadow lingered in every corner. His last words echoed. Let the past lie before it bites. I knew now, he was warning me off. I opened Mark's desk again. The cedar scent hit me, sharp and earthy. Under the pens, a small bank slip was wedged between receipts. Transfer record. $2,000 every month for 3 years. Each marked with initials, not a name. SR. Now my pulse thudded in my ears. That wasn't my account. Wasn't any bill I knew. And Mark never told me. The fridge clicked on, startling me. I stuffed the slip into my sweater pocket, fingers shaking. If Rick knew about these transfers, he'd use them against me. Or worse, he already was. I checked the hall closet next. The smell of pine cleaner and old wool lingered. Behind Mark's boots, a shoebox sat tucked deep. Inside, a torn photo. Mark standing with a young woman, maybe early 20s. Her hair dark, hand resting on his arm. The corner with her face was ripped away, edges frayed. A chill slid down my spine. Was this her? The same one he told me to protect. A gust rattled the window again. Loose pine needles scattered across the porch, whispering as they moved. The sound felt like a warning. I shut the closet softly, hiding the shoebox back where it was. My sweater pocket felt heavier with the bank slip. The notebook upstairs weighed on my mind. Mark's words. Protect her. Don't trust Rick. Somewhere, all of this connected. The slip, the torn photo, the key waiting in my drawer. The floor creaked behind me. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty. The creak echoed again. I turned, heart hammering. Rick stood in the hallway, shoulders filling the frame. His boots thudded once, deliberate, on the wood floor. The faint scent of motor oil clung to him. How long you been digging, Han? His voice was low. My hand tightened on my sweater pocket. The bank slip crinkled softly. I was looking for Mark's tools. I said flatly. Rick's eyes narrowed, flicking toward the hall closet. Tools. He stepped closer, boots dragging slightly. That closet's just old coats and junk. You planning to sell those, too? His smirk didn't reach his eyes. I shifted back a step, the floor groaning beneath me. The house felt smaller with him inside, walls closing in. His gaze swept over the living room, pausing on Mark's framed photo. Mark wouldn't want this mess, Han. You know that, right? His tone softened, but the edge stayed. The heater kicked on, a hollow whoosh filling the silence. I held his stare, steady as I could. Mark wouldn't want you here, Rick. Not like this. Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, maybe surprise. Then it was gone. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. You're wasting your time chasing ghosts. Sell the truck. Close it all, before you regret dragging up the past. The wind outside howled through the gaps in the window frame. Pine needles scratched against the siding like faint whispers. I didn't move, didn't speak. My fingers brushed the cool edge of the bank slip again. Rick finally straightened, stepping back toward the hallway. Think it over, Han. You're not as strong as you think. His boots thudded down the steps, each one slower than the last. The front door closed with a hollow thump. The house was quiet again, but not safe. I exhaled, only realizing then I'd been holding my breath. My hand slipped the bank slip from my pocket. The paper trembled in the draft, numbers stark against the white. 2,000, every month. 3 years. Always the same initials. I stared at the slip until the letters blurred. Then I heard it, a faint, metallic click from upstairs. The metallic click echoed again. Upstairs, near Mark's study. I moved slowly, every stair creaking under my weight. The air grew colder with each step. A faint draft slipped through the hallway window, carrying the smell of pine. Mark's study door was ajar. A thin line of light spilled across the hall. I pushed it open. The hinges groaned, long and low. The desk drawer was slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. The notebook sat on top, leather cover glinting faintly. Beside it, a small key I hadn't seen before. Not the 4B key, this one was brass etched with numbers. 17. A chill rippled through me. Mark never mentioned another key. My fingers hovered over it, cold metal glinting in the weak light. The heater downstairs clicked off, plunging the house into stillness. A floorboard popped behind me. I spun, heart pounding. The hallway was empty. Only shadows stretched across the floor, long and thin. But the air felt different. Heavy, like someone had just passed through. I picked up the brass key, its edge biting into my palm. 2 keys now. 2 places Mark had left for me to find. Whatever he hid, it wasn't meant for Rick. And maybe not just for me either. I slid the notebook and both keys into my sweater pocket. The cedar scent from the leather rose, sharp and grounding. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the siding again. The sound reminded me of Mark's voice on storm nights, calm but urgent. Stay steady, Han. Storms pass, but only if you face 'em. Downstairs, the fridge hummed to life again. Its low thrum masked the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Rick's truck, maybe. Or someone else, waiting in the dark. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. Headlights swept across the yard, slow and deliberate. The beam caught the old Ford, still sitting in the drive, the same truck that started this. My hand tightened around the keys. Whatever waited in Unit 4B, and now wherever 17 led, it was time to follow the trail. Before Rick buried it for good, Rick showed up before sunrise. His truck lights cut across the frosted yard, beams slicing through the pines. I heard his boots before the knock. Heavy, deliberate, thudding against the porch like warning shots. The door rattled as he pushed it open, uninvited. Cold air swept in with him, stinging my cheeks. He carried a manila folder. Set it on the kitchen table, slow and sure. His cologne, sharp and musky, filled the room. It overpowered the faint scent of Mark's old coat by the door. Need your signature, Han, he said, voice casual. Title transfer. Truck. House. Bank. Tie it up nice before the month's out. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I stayed standing. The heater clicked on, warm air humming through the vent. Didn't make the room any softer. What's the rush? I asked quietly. Mark's wedding band pressed cold against my skin, still hanging on its chain. Rick tapped the folder, nails clicking against the cardboard. Taxes. Bills, whatever. You don't want to get buried, do ya? He slid a pen across the table, the cheap plastic scraping against wood. I didn't touch it. My gaze drifted to the edge of the folder. Inside, I caught a glimpse of a bank logo, the same one on the transfer slips hidden in my sweater pocket upstairs. Rick noticed my pause. His smile thinned, almost vanished. Han, this is what Mark would want. Clean break. No dragging this out. Trust me. The fridge buzzed loudly, cutting through his words for a beat. Outside, a branch snapped in the wind, sharp and sudden. My hands curled around the back of a chair, knuckles whitening. Mark's words from the notebook burned in my head. Don't trust my brother. Rick slid the pen closer. The tip scratched faintly against the table. You can make this easy, Han. Sign, and it's done. Or, he let the word hang heavy. I glanced at the folder again. The heater shut off, leaving the room too quiet. My pulse filled the space, steady but strong. I wasn't signing anything. Not yet. Not until I knew what Mark left behind. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the loose frame of the kitchen window. Rick's shadow stretched long across the floor. Reaching almost to my feet, he didn't move. Neither did I. Rick sat down without asking. The chair legs scraped the wood, loud in the quiet kitchen. He flipped the folder open, papers fanning neatly. The faint rustle sounded sharper than it should. I stood still, letting him talk. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing Mark's wedding band. The cold metal steadied me, anchored me to the moment. Rick tapped the top page. Titles, taxes, all ready. Just need your signature here, here, and here. His pen clicked twice, a hollow sound. I leaned closer, not to read, but to stall. The heater hummed back on, warm air stirring the scent of his cologne. Underneath, I caught something faint. Old pine, the smell of Mark's coat. It made my stomach twist. I nodded slowly, pretending to study the lines. In the corner, a small date caught my eye. 2 days before Mark's heart attack. Whatever this was, Rick had prepared it early. Too early. My fingers tightened on the chair. Rick noticed. "You're stalling, Han?" he muttered. His smile was gone now, voice low. "You can't hold this place alone. Best sign and save yourself the headache." The fridge clicked off, plunging the kitchen into a heavy stillness. Outside, the wind rattled the loose gutter. Each metallic tap sounded like a countdown. I pulled the chair out slowly, sat across from him. My hand stayed on my lap steady. "I'll need to review these," I said softly. Rick's eyes narrowed, reading between my words. "You don't trust me." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. The papers shifted slightly under his weight, edges curling. I met his stare, steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Mark left things unfinished. I need to be sure." For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind howled again, whistling through the cracked window pane. Rick finally leaned back, chair creaking under him. His smirk returned, thin and tired. "Fine. But don't take too long, Han. The past ain't as quiet as you think." He stacked the papers, slow and deliberate, slid the folder toward me. The pen rolled, landing near my hand. Its tip scratched softly against the wood, like a warning. The heater shut off again. The house felt colder despite the still air. Rick's shadow stretched across the floor as he stood. "Decide soon?" he said. Then his boots thudded toward the door, fading step by step. I sat there, staring at the folder. The quiet pressed in, heavy. Upstairs, something shifted. A faint, wooden creak from Mark's study. The creak came again. From upstairs, steady, like a slow breath through wood. I climbed the stairs carefully. Each step moaned beneath my weight, the sound stretching through the hall. The pine wind slipped through a cracked window, sharp and cold against my face. Mark's study door was half open. The thin glow of the desk lamp cut through the shadows. I stepped inside, the floor groaning softly beneath me. The notebook lay open on the desk. Not where I had left it. Pages flipped slightly from the draft drifting through the window. The brass key from earlier sat beside it, glinting faintly. Next to it, a sealed envelope. My name written on the front in Mark's careful hand. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt thick, almost heavy. The faint smell of cedar clung to it, like the notebook. Inside, a single sheet. Mark's handwriting, neat but rushed in spots. "Hannah, if Rick pressures you, there's more in Unit 4B. Bank records, titles, and the proof of who she is. Keep this safe. Don't let him bury it." The words sank deep, pulling my chest tight. More in 4B. Proof of, Proof Rick didn't want me to see. I folded the letter slowly, slipping it into my sweater pocket. The brass key followed. Both felt heavier than they should. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the loose gutter. A pine branch scraped the siding, long and slow. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled faintly. Rick hadn't gone far. I shut the notebook gently, tucking it under my arm. The cedar scent rose again, sharp and grounding. The desk lamp flickered once, dimming briefly before steadying. Downstairs, the fridge hummed to life, its vibration faint through the floorboards. I stood still for a moment, the quiet pressing in. Mark's words echoed in my head. Don't trust my brother. Protect her. I tightened my grip on the letter and keys. Unit 4B waited. Whatever Mark left, it was time to find it. Before Rick made it disappear forever. The storage yard was empty when I pulled in. The morning air bit cold, sharp against my throat. Frost still clung to the chain link fence, glittering in the weak sun. Unit 4B sat at the far end, tucked between two dented doors. The metal latch felt icy under my hand. My breath came out in clouds as I slid the key in. The lock turned with a stiff, grinding click. The door screeched as I rolled it up. Cold air spilled out, tinged with dust and something older. Paper, maybe. Or leather, like Mark's notebook. Inside, the light was dim. A single bulb flickered weakly overhead, humming faintly. The air smelled stale, heavy with years of stillness. Cardboard boxes lined the back wall. Each was labeled in Mark's handwriting, steady and careful. The top one read, "Records, private." My hands shook as I pried it open. Inside, neatly stacked folders, bank statements, trust documents, and a folder marked with a name I didn't know. Sophie. The paper edges were cold, sharp against my fingertips. Each statement showed transfers. 2,000 every month, matching the slips I found at home. Not random. Consistent. Mark had been sending money somewhere, quietly, for years. Underneath, a worn photo album. The first picture stopped me. Mark, younger, standing beside a teenage girl with dark hair. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. The same girl from the torn photo in the closet. A sound echoed behind me. A faint metallic clang, somewhere near the gate. My pulse kicked hard. I froze, listening. The wind outside rattled a loose sheet of tin, sharp and hollow. I couldn't tell if it was just the wind. Or someone watching. I slid the album and the Sophie folder into my bag. The papers rustled softly, loud in the still air. The bulb flickered once, humming louder, like it might go out. The lock's cold weight pressed in my pocket. I glanced back at the boxes still stacked along the wall. More records. Maybe more names. But footsteps crunched faintly on the gravel outside. The bulb above me dimmed. The sound outside stopped. Too sudden to be wind. I reached for the door latch, my breath shallow. The frost on the frame cracked softly beneath my grip. Whoever was out there. They were waiting. The gravel crunched again, closer this time. I held my breath, ears straining in the silence. Outside, the faint hum of a truck engine idled low. The sound blended with the cold wind, faint but steady. Someone hadn't left. They were waiting. I crouched near the stack of boxes, staying low. The flickering bulb overhead cast long, jagged shadows along the concrete floor. The air tasted metallic, sharp from the cold and dust. Another folder sat beneath the Sophie records. Its corner was marked with Rick's name, scrawled in rough black ink. I eased it out, careful not to rustle the papers. Inside, receipts, withdrawals, property transfers, all dated after Mark's death. Rick had been moving money, quick and quiet, to his own accounts. My pulse thudded in my ears. The heater from my car clicked faintly outside, then went still. The yard had gone quiet except for the wind. Even the hum of the bulb seemed louder now, its faint buzz filling the space. Footsteps approached, soft but deliberate. They stopped just outside the unit. The shadow of boots stretched across the thin strip of light under the door. Then nothing. I tucked the Sophie folder and Rick's file deep into my bag. The zipper rasped softly, louder than I meant. My breath fogged in the cold air, hanging like smoke. The bulb above flickered again, dimming to a faint glow. The boots shifted. The sound of gravel sliding underfoot. Slow and deliberate. They weren't leaving. They were listening. I eased the door down halfway, leaving just enough to slip out fast. The metal rollers groaned softly, a long scraping sound that made my teeth clench. Outside, The wind picked up, rattling the chain link fence. It covered some of the noise, but not all. The boots moved again. Closer now, circling toward the corner of the unit. I tightened my grip on the door latch, feeling the cold bite through my gloves. The key to the padlock dug into my palm. The bulb overhead buzzed once, then went out completely. Darkness filled the space, thick and absolute. The only sound left was the faint crunch of gravel behind me. Each step slow, deliberate, closing in. The dark pressed in heavy, almost physical. I gripped the latch tighter, cold metal biting my skin. The boots stopped. Silence, except for the faint whistle of wind through the fence. Then a low creak, like a hinge, from near the gate. I slid out, keeping my movements slow. The bag on my shoulder felt heavier with every step. Each folder inside seemed to rattle with my heartbeat. The frost-crusted gravel shifted beneath my boots. Every crunch felt too loud, like it would draw fire. My breath came shallow, fogging in thin, pale bursts. At the edge of the unit, a shadow moved. Tall, broad, shouldered, standing near the exit gate. The faint glow of a cigarette tip lit the outline of a face. Rick. He didn't move, just watched. I ducked behind a row of lockers, my back pressing against cold metal. The air smelled of rust and stale oil. My fingers brushed the Sophie folder through the canvas bag, gripping it tight. The only thing louder than the wind was my pulse. Rick's voice carried low across the yard. "Ya can't run forever, Han. Better to talk before it gets messy." His boots crunched, slow and deliberate, toward the row of lockers. I crouched low, waited for the wind to rise. When it did, rattling the loose tin on the far fence, I moved. Silent steps, quick, sliding along the lockers toward the back exit. My hand brushed a cold pipe, metal freezing against my palm. Near the exit, a smaller box caught my eye, unmarked, shoved under a workbench. Something inside shifted when I nudged it. Paper, and something heavier. Metal. I hesitated, then slipped it into my bag. No time to open it now. The cigarette glow was closer, bobbing as Rick rounded the corner. I bolted through the back exit, the chain link gate groaning as it swung. The cold air hit hard, sharp in my lungs. Gravel sprayed as I sprinted to my car, fumbling for the keys. The engine turned over, coughing once before catching. Headlights flared, sweeping across the yard. For a second, I saw Rick's figure frozen by the gate. Then he stepped back into the shadows, vanishing behind the fence. I drove fast, tires spitting frost and dirt. The Sophie folder, Rick's file, and the unmarked box sat heavy beside me. Whatever Mark had been protecting, it was bigger than I thought. And Rick wasn't letting it go quietly. The house felt hollow when I came back. The heater hummed, but the air stayed cold. I set the bag on the table, careful. Papers spilled slightly. Sophie's folder, Rick's receipts, the unmarked box. The faint scent of dust and old leather drifted up. Outside, Rick's truck passed by slow. Headlights cut through the curtains, sweeping across the walls like searchlights. He didn't stop, but I knew he'd circle again. I poured coffee, hands trembling slightly. The smell filled the kitchen, bitter and burnt. The cup warmed my fingers but not much else. The unmarked box sat on the table. I opened it slowly. Inside, a small lockbox, 2 keys and a flash drive. No labels, just weight and silence. The floor creaked in the hallway. I froze, but it was only the house settling. Still, the sound made my chest tighten. I grabbed my phone and called Claire. Her voice came soft, steady. "You safe?" she asked. "For now," I whispered. "I found more. It's bigger than we thought." She paused, then, "Don't do this alone, Han. Rick won't back off, not now." Her words felt heavier than the bag. I stared at the lockbox. The metal was cold, smooth, almost slick under my fingertips. Somewhere inside this was the truth. Or the reason Mark kept silent all those years. A gust rattled the window. Pine needles scraping against the siding. The sound felt like fingers trailing along the walls. Rick's shadow lingered in my thoughts, patient, circling. Claire's voice broke the quiet. You ready to fight him? Or just hold on and hope it fades? I didn't answer right away. My breath fogged faintly in the chill. The heater clicked off, leaving a hollow stillness. If you were me, would you stand up now? Or stay silent and wait? Comment 1 or 2. The fridge buzzed low, a faint hum through the floor. Somewhere outside, gravel shifted near the driveway. I reached for the flash drive, fingers tightening. Whatever was on it, it would decide my next move. The laptop's fan whirred as it woke. The blue glow from the screen lit the dark room. Outside, wind howled through the trees, whistling against the siding. I slid the flash drive in. The port clicked, louder than it should. A single folder appeared, unnamed, sitting in the corner of the screen. My breath slowed as I opened it. Rows of documents filled the display. Bank transfers, contracts, scanned deeds. All tied to Rick's construction company. Some signed by Mark before his death. Others forged. The dates proved it. My pulse climbed. Each file revealed more. Rick had been shifting money, selling off Mark's assets quietly. Every month, right under my nose, the Sophie folder appeared too, nested deep inside. I clicked it. Photos filled the screen. Mark with the girl. Sophie. Through the years. Birthdays, graduations, small trips. He'd been supporting her life, quietly, since she was a child. The last image froze me. Mark, holding a letter. The date scrawled across it, 2 days before his heart attack. The same day Rick had prepared those transfer papers. The heater clicked on. Warm air pushing through the vents. Didn't ease the chill crawling my spine. Someone had rushed Mark before he died. Maybe more than rushed. I opened the final file. A recorded voicemail, saved as an audio note. Mark's voice, shaky, tired. If anything happens, Claire knows where to look. Protect Sophie. Rick's pushing for more. I think he knows. The laptop fan kicked louder, almost drowning his voice. My hand covered my mouth, holding in the breath clawing out. Rick had been circling, not just for property. For whatever leverage Sophie represented. The wind outside surged, rattling the gutter hard enough to shake the window pane. A faint beam of headlights swept across the yard. Then stopped. No engine hum. Just stillness. I closed the laptop fast, pulling the flash drive free. The screen went black, leaving the room in silence. The hum of the heater felt distant, almost muted. Downstairs, gravel shifted on the driveway. Soft, deliberate steps crunching closer to the porch. The shadow of boots stretched across the gap under the front door. Then, a faint knock. 3 taps. Slow, measured. The knocks came again. 3 taps, slow, spaced apart like a warning. I stayed still, barely breathing. The laptop sat closed, flash drive hidden in my pocket. The heater hummed softly, but the air still felt cold. Gravel shifted outside, crunching with each deliberate step. A faint shadow slid across the curtains, long and distorted. The scent of pine needles drifted through the cracked window. It carried the sharp bite of the night air. I eased toward the hallway, careful not to let the floorboards groan. Each step measured, every creak sounding louder than it should. Mark's notebook rested in the drawer by the stairs. I grabbed it, fingers tight around the worn leather. The bag sat by the door. Inside, Sophie's folder, Rick's receipts, the lockbox. The proof Mark had left. Everything Rick didn't want seen. Another knock, softer this time, followed by silence. Not even the wind moved now. I reached for the light switch but stopped. Kept the room dark, let my eyes adjust. Through the window's edge, I saw movement. A figure near the old oak, barely lit by the porch light. Broad shoulders, still, watching. My breath fogged faintly, despite the heater. I slid my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over Claire's number. Didn't call. Noise might draw him closer. Instead, I crouched near the stairs, eyes on the door. Every sound sharpened. The hum of the fridge, the faint rattle of the window. Even my heartbeat felt loud enough to hear. The figure shifted once, then slowly turned. Boots scraped against the gravel as he walked back toward the road. No headlights. No engine. Just disappearing into the dark. I didn't move for a long moment. The clock on the wall ticked, each second stretching. Finally, I grabbed the bag, the notebook, the flash drive. If Rick wanted a quiet war, I'd give him one. The heater clicked off. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I locked the door, checked every window, and slipped the flash drive under my pillow. Tonight, I wouldn't sleep much. By morning, I'd start moving the evidence. Claire would know where to keep it safe. And Rick, he'd learn. He wasn't the only one who could circle and wait. Morning frost glazed the windshield when I stepped outside. The cold bit my fingers as I scraped the glass. Rick's truck wasn't on the street, but his shadow still lingered. The bag sat on the passenger seat. Inside, Sophie's folder, Rick's receipts, the flash drive, and the lockbox. Every piece Mark wanted protected. The sky was pale, streaked with thin clouds. The air smelled like pine and distant smoke from someone's chimney. The road hummed under the tires as I drove toward Claire's shop. Her office sat off Route 66, quiet this early. A single light glowed behind the blinds, soft and steady. I parked in the back, away from the street. The gravel crunched softly under my boots as I walked in. Claire met me at the door, eyes sharp, voice low. "Got it all?" she asked. I nodded, setting the bag on her desk. The faint scent of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air. A small comfort against the weight in my chest. She unzipped the bag, flipping through the papers quickly. Her brow furrowed at the forged deeds and Rick's transfers. "He's been bleeding the estate dry," she murmured. "And Sophie, he's hiding her to keep control." I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles white. "We lock it all down," I said quietly. "Bank, attorney, whatever it takes. Rick can't touch this before we're ready." The Claire nodded, sliding the flash drive into a small safe under her desk. The metallic click echoed softly, sharp in the stillness. "These records stay here. No copies leave until we move." The heater in the corner buzzed faintly, cutting through the silence. I stared at Sophie's folder still on the desk. Her birth certificate sat on top, Mark's name inked clearly. She had no idea how close Rick was to erasing her share completely. Claire's voice pulled me back. "You sure you're ready for what comes after? He won't just back off." I met her gaze, steady despite the churn in my stomach. "I'm not hiding anymore." The office lights flickered once, just briefly. A shadow crossed the window, moving slow along the sidewalk. Claire's eyes darted toward the blinds. Her hand hovered near the desk lamp, ready to kill the light. Outside, gravel shifted softly. A faint, deliberate rhythm. Not the wind. Someone was waiting. The shadow lingered by the window, unmoving. The blinds rattled softly as a draft slipped under the doorframe. Claire switched off the desk lamp. The room dimmed to a faint glow from the hallway bulb. We stayed still, listening. No footsteps now. Just the heater's low buzz in the corner. I reached for Sophie's folder, tucking it back into the bag. The paper edges scraped lightly against the canvas, loud in the quiet. Claire glanced toward the blinds, her jaw tight. "That's him," she whispered. "He's been circling here all week." The outside, gravel shifted. A slow crunch, then a pause, like someone testing each step. The faint smell of cigarette smoke drifted through the cracked window. Rick. Claire slid open the bottom drawer, pulling out another small safe. She set it on the floor, the metal cold and heavy. "Help me move this to the back," she murmured. "We'll lock it all down before he tries anything." We lifted the safe together. The weight pulled at my arms, the cold metal biting through my sleeves. Each step across the office floor creaked. Despite our caution, the sound felt too loud. Outside, the crunching gravel stopped. I froze near the back door. The faint hum of a truck engine rolled low from the street, idling without lights. Claire glanced at me, eyes sharp in the dim glow. "Rear exit," she mouthed. We set the safe down behind the supply shelves. The faint smell of cardboard and pine cleaner hung in the air. Claire handed me the bag, zipping it tight. "Get this to the attorney," she said softly. "Today. Before Rick figures out we're 2 steps ahead." The blinds at the front shifted slightly, like a finger trailing the edge. My chest tightened, breath shallow. Claire gripped the desk edge, knuckles white. "Go," she mouthed again, pointing to the rear hall. I moved carefully, each step deliberate. The floorboards creaked once, soft but sharp in the quiet. Outside, the truck engine clicked off, leaving nothing but the hum of the heater. Then a faint sound. A boot scraping against the side wall. Slow. Deliberate. Closing in. The hallway ahead was dark, the only light spilling from Claire's office. I tightened my grip on the bag, heart hammering. The rear exit door rattled softly in the draft. Someone was already waiting outside. The rear door shuddered softly in the draft. The metal handle was cold beneath my fingers, slick with condensation. Outside, boots scraped against the gravel again. Slow, steady, circling closer to the back corner. Claire dimmed the last light, leaving only the glow of the EXIT sign. My breath fogged faintly, each inhale shallow. The heater clicked off, plunging the office into a deep, brittle silence. Every sound outside carried sharper. Boots, the faint clink of keys, a muted exhale. Claire leaned close. "Wait for the wind," she whispered, barely a breath. Her eyes flicked toward the rattling blinds, listening. The draft rose suddenly, rattling the side gutters hard. She nodded once. "Go." I eased the rear door open. The hinge squealed, faint but sharp in the still air. I slipped out, crouching low, bag tight against my chest. The cold night stung my face, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Rick's shadow stretched across the far fence, long under the dim security light. He was pacing now, slow arcs. Searching. His cigarette glow bobbed with each step. I kept to the edge of the building, boots barely skimming the gravel. Every crunch felt like a shout in the dark. Claire stayed inside, her silhouette still near the blinds. A decoy if he came this way. At the lot's edge, my car waited, hidden near a dumpster. The key fob was warm in my palm, slick with sweat. I pressed it gently. No horn, no flash. Just the quiet click of the locks. The wind rose again, tossing pine needles across the asphalt in small, dry swirls. I used the sound to mask my steps, sliding into the driver's seat. The engine turned over, quiet but steady. Rick's head snapped toward the sound. His shadow shifted, boots crunching faster now. The glow of his cigarette hit the ground, stomped out. He started moving, fast. I threw the car into gear, tires crunching softly as I eased onto the side road. Didn't gun it. Didn't draw attention. Just steady, controlled. Like Mark used to tell me. In the rearview, Rick's shadow grew smaller, swallowed by the dim yard lights. But his presence stayed heavy, even miles away. The bag sat on the seat beside me, heavy with truth. Tomorrow, the attorney would get it all. And Rick. He'd find out his circle was finally breaking. The courthouse smelled like dust and cold marble. The faint scent of old paper clung to the hall. Every footstep echoed sharp against the tile. I sat on a wooden bench, bag at my feet. Inside, Sophie's folder, Rick's transfers, Mark's letter, and the flash drive. Claire sat beside me, quiet, hands folded in her lap. The morning light filtered through tall windows, pale and weak. Outside, traffic hummed, muffled by the heavy walls. Inside, the silence felt heavier, almost pressing down. Rick strode through the double doors, boots loud on the tile. He wore his usual smirk, shoulders squared, like he owned the place. A faint whiff of his cologne drifted past, sharp and musky. He didn't look at me, just adjusted his jacket and spoke to his lawyer. The bailiff called the case. The sound echoed, clipped and stern. Claire gave me a nod, small but steady. My fingers brushed Mark's letter through the fabric of the bag. The paper's edge felt cold, grounding me. We walked into the chamber. The walls rose high, lined with faded flags and muted paintings. The judge's bench loomed ahead, polished wood catching the light. Every creak of the floor felt too loud under my boots. Rick settled across the aisle, leaning back in his chair. His lawyer spread papers across their table, neat and deliberate. I saw the top page. Property transfer forms, already signed by Rick. He thought this was already over. Claire opened the bag, sliding the flash drive toward me. Her hand lingered on mine, firm and reassuring. "We'll start with the numbers," she whispered. "Then the letter." The clerk announced the start. The judge's gavel cracked, sharp and final. Rick's smirk deepened as his lawyer stood, voice smooth. "Your Honor, we're here to finalize the estate transfer per the documents." I tightened my grip on the flash drive. My pulse thudded in my ears, matching the hollow echo of each word. Mark's words burned in my head. "Protect her. Don't trust my brother." The judge turned to me, brow raised. "Mrs. Danner, do you have any response before we proceed?" The air in the chamber felt still, almost brittle. My fingers brushed the bag again, feeling the weight of the folder inside. Rick leaned back further, a hint of a smile tugging his mouth. He thought I'd fold. Not this time. I rose slowly, chair legs scraping softly against the floor. Claire placed the first folder in my hand. The papers rustled, loud in the heavy silence. I stepped toward the bench, ready to speak. The judge gestured for me to speak. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I set the first folder on the bench. The papers slid across the polished wood, edges whispering. Bank transfers, property deeds, each stamped with dates and Rick's forged signatures. Claire connected the flash drive to the clerk's laptop. The hum of the projector filled the silence as the files appeared on screen. Every transaction glowed under the pale light, undeniable. Rick shifted in his chair. His smirk thinned, jaw tightening. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering fast. The lawyer's brow furrowed as the files kept scrolling. The judge's voice cut through, even and firm. These signatures were verified. "Yes, Your Honor," Claire replied, steady. "By two independent auditors, and each matches dates. Rick filed new deeds." Rick's lawyer stood abruptly, voice sharp. "These records are incomplete. This is irrelevant to the estate division." His words echoed off the chamber walls, brittle and strained. I slid Mark's letter forward. The paper felt heavy, the ink dark under the courtroom light. "Your Honor, this is Mark Danner's statement." He left it for me, in his hand. The clerk read aloud, voice steady. "If Rick pressures you, there's more in Unit 4B. Bank records, titles, and proof of who she is. Protect Sophie. Don't let him bury it." Murmurs rippled through the gallery, low and restless. The judge's gavel cracked, silencing them. Rick's lawyer reached for his notes, fumbling. Rick's eyes flicked toward me, colder now, no smile. Claire stepped forward with Sophie's birth certificate. The paper glinted faintly, edges worn from handling. Mark acknowledged Sophie as his daughter. He supported her quietly for years. Rick concealed these transfers to cut her out. The judge leaned back, hands steepled. The chamber air felt heavier, almost still. Rick sat rigid, fingers drumming once on the table, sharp and impatient. The judge's gaze shifted to him. "Mr. Danner, do you have any rebuttal for these records?" Rick opened his mouth but stopped. His lawyer touched his arm, shaking his head subtly. Rick's jaw worked, silent. The faint hum of the projector buzzed louder, filling the gap. The judge turned back to me. "Mrs. Danner, do you have anything further to add before I deliberate?" The gallery stayed hushed, waiting. I glanced at Claire, then the remaining folder in the bag. The last piece Mark left behind. I pulled it out, the paper cold in my hands. The last folder felt heavier than the rest. Its edges were stiff, cold against my fingertips. I placed it on the bench. The clerk opened it, papers fanning out in the still air. A hush settled over the chamber as the contents spread. Inside were notarized trust amendments. Mark had revised the estate, naming Sophie and me as equal heirs. Each page dated, signed, and witnessed 2 weeks before his death. The judge examined the signatures, tracing a finger along the final page. The faint rustle of paper echoed in the quiet room. Outside, wind rattled a loose shutter, faint but sharp. Rick's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve, whispering fast. The smirk was gone. His jaw flexed, shoulders rigid, eyes locked on me. The judge cleared his throat. "These documents, combined with the bank transfers and letter, establish intent. Mark Danner's wishes are clear." He turned toward Rick, gaze steady. "Mr. Danner, this court finds you knowingly withheld assets and forged filings." Here murmurs rippled through the gallery, a low, restless hum. The gavel cracked once, loud and final. Control of the estate transfers to Mrs. Danner and Sophie Rivers immediately. "Mr. Danner, you'll comply with restitution terms or face criminal charges." Rick's fists tightened at his sides. His lawyer spoke in a low rush, but he didn't respond. His stare stayed fixed on me, cold and sharp. The faint draft from the hallway brushed my neck, raising goosebumps. Claire's hand touched my arm gently. "You did it," she whispered, quiet but firm. Her voice grounded me, soft over the tension in the room. Rick finally spoke, voice low and rough. "This isn't over, Han. You don't know who you're protecting." His words cut through the murmurs, flat and bitter. The judge's gavel cracked again. "Mr. Danner, you're dismissed. Further comments will be held for appeal filings only." Rick turned sharply, boots striking hard against the tile as he left. The faint smell of his cologne lingered behind, sharp and stale. The sound of the heavy doors closing echoed like a final note. The clerk handed me Mark's letter and Sophie's folder. The papers were cool, their weight almost unfamiliar now. The gallery began to disperse, murmurs fading into the marble hall. Claire gathered the remaining files, tucking them back into the bag. Her smile was faint but real. "Let's go," she murmured. "Time to tell Sophie what's hers." The cold air outside hit my face as we stepped through the courthouse doors. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt lighter. But Rick's last words still echoed in the back of my mind. The house felt different now. Quieter, but not hollow like before. The heater's low hum carried warmth into every corner. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, soft and gold. The scent of fresh bread drifted from the oven. A simple comfort, filling the air with something close to peace. I set Mark's plaque on the table. The wood was cool, the brass nameplate gleaming faintly in the light. His service years etched deep, a reminder of everything he left behind. Claire called earlier. Sophie agreed to meet me today. She sounded nervous, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt the same. Nervous, but steady. It was time. The wind outside rattled the bare branches, a soft, hollow sound. Leaves scraped across the porch, carried by the autumn breeze. Each sound felt like a shift, like something turning a page. I glanced at the framed photo on the counter. Mark, smiling, holding a wildflower bouquet he'd picked near Coconino. The edges of the photo were worn, the colors fading. It didn't sting like before. Now, it just felt like part of the story. The kettle whistled softly. I poured tea, the steam curling into the air, fragrant and calming. The cup warmed my hands, steadied my breath. On the table, Sophie's birth certificate lay beside Mark's letter. The papers no longer felt heavy, just real. Proof of the truth, proof of what came next. A car door closed outside. The sound was light, tentative. Through the window, I saw a figure walking up the path. Dark hair pulled back, jacket zipped against the chill. Her steps were careful, almost hesitant. My breath caught, but I exhaled slowly. The wind outside died down, leaving only the sound of her boots on the porch. I wiped my hands on a towel, heart steady but quick. The knock came, gentle, almost questioning. 3 soft taps. Not Rick's, not heavy. Sophie's. I opened the door slowly. The autumn air swept in, cool and crisp. Sophie stood there, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. Her eyes flicked up, dark and uncertain. She looked younger than I expected, shoulders drawn tight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Come in," I said softly. My voice felt steadier than I thought it would. She nodded once, stepping over the threshold. The floor creaked under her boots as we walked to the kitchen. The scent of fresh bread and steeping tea filled the space. It softened the edges of the silence. She glanced at the plaque on the table. Her gaze lingered on Mark's name, tracing the brass letters silently. "He kept that?" she asked, voice barely audible. "He did," I said gently. "Never took it down. Not even after he retired." Her lips pressed together, a small nod. I poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. The steam curled up, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. She wrapped her hands around the cup, fingers pale from the cold. For a while, we sat in quiet. Only the kettle's faint ticking and the wind outside filled the space. She finally spoke, eyes still on the plaque. "I didn't know he thought about me that much." I studied her face, the trace of Mark's jawline in her profile. "He did," I said softly. "More than you realize. He left things for you. Things Rick wanted gone." Her brow furrowed, her fingers tightening on the cup. "Rick. He showed up at my dorm last week. Told me not to come here. Said it would ruin everything." The heater clicked on, filling the kitchen with a low hum. Sophie's voice stayed low, almost lost under the sound. "I didn't believe him. But I didn't know if you'd want me here either." I reached across the table, resting my hand near hers. Not touching, just close enough to bridge the gap. "You belong here more than he ever will," I whispered. Her shoulders eased, just slightly. The wind outside rattled a loose shutter, a sharp, brief sound. She glanced toward the window, then back at me. "What happens now?" I took a slow breath, the chamomile scent grounding me. Outside, a car engine rumbled faintly in the distance. Rick's? Maybe. Or just passing traffic. Either way, it reminded me. Our work wasn't done yet. The wind outside faded as dusk settled. Soft orange light washed across the kitchen walls, warm and still. Sophie sipped her tea slowly. Her shoulders had lowered, tension easing bit by bit. The scent of fresh bread lingered, filling the space with quiet comfort. I slid Mark's letter across the table. Her fingers hovered before she picked it up. The paper rustled softly as she unfolded it. She read in silence, eyes tracing every word. Her lips trembled once, but she kept reading to the end. When she set it down, her gaze met mine. "He wanted us to have something better," she whispered. I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening. Not just his name. A chance to start over. To do this right. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. The heater clicked off, leaving a comfortable stillness. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock. I placed Sophie's birth certificate beside the letter. "Rick can't touch this anymore," I said quietly. "Everything Mark meant for you, it's safe now." She looked down at the papers, then back at the plaque. Her hand brushed the brass letters softly. "Maybe we keep this up," she murmured. "Not just for him, for what's next." Outside, headlights passed along the road, fading quickly. No lingering shadows, no circling tonight. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. We cut into the bread, the warm crust cracking softly. The scent of butter and yeast filled the kitchen. For a while, we ate in silence, not heavy, just easy. Sophie glanced toward the window, where the last traces of daylight slipped away. "Do you think it ever stops?" she asked. "The anger? The noise?" I reached for her hand, steady and warm. "No," I said softly. "But it changes. It makes room for better things." She nodded, her fingers curling gently around mine. The wind outside was only a whisper now, brushing along the siding. Inside, the warmth held steady. Not perfect, but enough to start again. If betrayal ever knocked you down, would you share your story? Or hold it close until you're ready? Comment below. You're not alone. Hannah's fight began with a dusty truck and a forgotten notebook. It ended with truth uncovered, Rick stripped of his hold, and Sophie given her rightful place. Mark's secrets had hurt, but they also showed Hannah a different kind of strength. Quiet, deliberate, unshaken. She learned justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves in silence, with folders, patient allies, and steady hands. It doesn't erase betrayal, but it builds something steadier beyond it. Her home wasn't just walls and deeds anymore. It became a space where Sophie could sit, where Mark's memory was honest, and where Hannah could breathe without fear. For women who've carried betrayal, the lesson is simple but hard. Your legacy isn't what they try to steal. It's what you rebuild, quietly, on your own terms. And sometimes, healing begins not with answers, but with the courage to face the storm and stay standing when the wind dies down.